She handed me the glass with a smile. Far too sweet. Far too perfect. A small treat for my dearest mother-in-law, she said. Her tone was sugary sweet, the kind that coats words in shame but leaves a bitter aftertaste. I looked at the drink. I looked at her, and something deep inside me, call it instinct, call it experience, call it a mother's sixth sense, whispered that this was not kindness. Her eyes darted sideways just once. In that tiny flicker, I saw it. A flash of expectation. A flash of waiting. She was watching me to see what I would do. So I smiled back. And while they laughed at the dining table, I did something no one saw. I slowly reached across and swapped the glasses. I set mine in front of her own mother, the same woman who had once called me useless at a family gathering. I said no word. I simply watched, and exactly 35 minutes later, everything changed. Chairs moved. Voices rose. Faces went pale. One person clutched their chest. Another called for help. And through it all, I sat there calmly, still holding the glass that was meant for me. The glass she had poured. The one she had smiled over. The one I never drank from. Let me tell you what happened in those 35 minutes. She handed me the glass with a smile. Far too sweet, far too perfect. A small treat for my dearest mother-in-law, she said. Her tone was sugary sweet, the kind that coats words in shame but leaves a bitter aftertaste. I looked at the drink, I looked at her, and something deep inside me, call it instinct, call it experience, call it a mother's sixth sense, whispered that this was not kindness. It was something else, something calculating. She quickly turned away as if she had nothing to hide. But her eyes, they darted sideways just once, and in that tiny flicker, I saw it. A flash of expectation, a flash of waiting. She was watching me to see what I would do, so I smiled back. While they laughed and chatted at the dining table, I did something no one saw, something I hadn't even planned. I slowly reached across the table and swapped the glasses. I set Iris in front of her own mother, the same woman who had once called me useless at a family gathering, the same woman who looked down on me at every opportunity. I said no word. I did not need to. I simply watched and waited, and exactly 35 minutes later, everything changed. Chairs were moved, voices rose, faces went pale. One person clutched their chest, another called for help, and through it all, I sat there calmly, still holding the glass that was meant for me, the glass she had poured, the one she had smiled over, the one I never drank from. People often think betrayal comes loudly, with slamming doors, raised voices, angry tears. Yet sometimes it comes in silence, in a smile, in a drink handed to you with such a perfect grin that you almost forget to question it. Almost. If you are coming across one of our stories for the first time, a hearty welcome. Please press the like button and let us know in the comments where you are watching from. We love to see how far these stories travel and do not scroll away, because what happened next, no one saw coming. Before all this happened, before the drink, before the swap, before the 35 minutes that changed everything, there was only me, a woman who had raised her only son with everything she had. I was not born into wealth. I did not have prestigious degrees hanging on the walls, but I had grit, I had loyalty, and I had love. Real quiet love, the kind that did not need applause to feel real. I worked 2 jobs when my husband passed away. My boy was 12. I remember his small hands helping me with the laundry folding late into the night, and how he always said, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of you someday." And I didn't just believe him because he was my son, but because he was that kind of boy. Kind, attentive, always looking out for me. We were close, closer than close. But life has a strange way of changing people, and sometimes you don't even notice it until it is too late. He met her at a company summer party. She was radiant, beautiful, confident in a way that made rooms fall silent. She had a laugh that drew people in, and a way of speaking that made her seem wiser than she was. I admit I liked her at first. Or rather, I wanted to like her for his sake. The first time he brought her home, she praised my food, asked for seconds, said my home was cozy, though the way she said it made me wonder if that was a code word for small. I told myself I was too sensitive, paranoid, but that little voice never stopped whispering. The change started slowly, like tiny cracks in a porcelain vase. She began correcting him in front of me. Jokes at his expense, small but frequent. Then she turned her attention to me. It was never direct, never enough to call her out on, but the jabs were there. One Christmas, she gave me wrinkle cream, wrapped in a gold ribbon. "It's anti-aging," she said, smiling. I swear by it. Another time, she offered to teach me how to use Google Docs because, in her words, "You probably struggle with things like that." I wanted to believe it was generational, that she didn't mean any harm, that it was me, not her. Yet every interaction left a trace, small invisible bruises that no one could see, except maybe her mother. The first time I met her mother was at their engagement dinner. She arrived in a car that probably cost more than my house. She barely acknowledged me, didn't shake my hand, only nodded as if I were staff. During the meal, she leaned across the table and asked my son, in front of everyone, "So, are you sure about this? I mean, are you truly ready to marry someone with such a modest background?" The room fell silent. My son laughed nervously, brushed it aside. I swallowed hard, kept my smile. Yet in that moment, something broke inside me, not out of pain, but from the realization that this was no accident. She wasn't just rude, she was intentional. The wedding came quickly, too quickly. Her mother took over most of the planning. I was assigned a seat and a dress code. No voice, no space. I told myself it is their day, not mine. But that did not stop the pain. On the day of the ceremony, I arrived early. I saw her mother floating through the room as if it belonged to her. I watched my son look at his bride the way he used to look at me when he brought home his report cards, eager for approval. And I knew then that I was losing him. Marriage changes things, that is natural. But what came next, what followed the wedding, was not natural. It was a cold, quiet, gradual exclusion. I was no longer invited to dinners. Messages went unanswered. Holidays became complicated. When I visited, she was always watching, not welcoming, but surveilling. My son no longer called me Mom. He started calling me by my first name. "Thanks for stopping by, Eleanor." Eleanor. I had become a visitor in my own child's life. Still, I remained polite. I remained present. I held on to hope. I told myself it was just a phase. Yet with every visit, something new happened. Subtle jabs, passive-aggressive smiles. My favorite mug disappeared. My spot on the living room sofa was suddenly too cluttered for guests. My son's eyes no longer met mine, and then came the health issues. I felt dizzy after a meal. I was tired in a way I couldn't explain, confused. I started taking notes, writing down what I ate, when I felt sick, and most often it happened when she cooked, when she handed me herbal tea, when she poured my drink. The doctors found nothing. Stress, they said, maybe age, but my gut knew better, because while I was losing weight, losing sleep, losing time, she was getting bolder, and her mother. She was always there, presiding like a queen, always whispering things I couldn't hear, laughing in a way that made the air around them feel colder. The two were a team, inseparable, intimidating, united in a way that made me feel like an outsider in my own family. Then one day at a family brunch she insisted on hosting. It happened. She handed me a glass with a lime wedge and the clinking of ice. "A small treat for my dearest mother-in-law," she said. Her grin stretched from ear to ear. I looked around the room. My son was distracted, laughing with his stepmother-in-law. No one noticed us except her. She was watching, waiting, expecting me to drink it as always. But this time, I didn't. I waited. I watched. And when her back was turned, I swapped the glasses. I didn't blink, I just swapped them. Her mother didn't notice either. She was too busy bragging about her new stock investments and the renovation of her beach house. She picked up the glass, clinked it against the edge of her mimosa, and drank. And I waited 35 minutes. That was all it took. 35 minutes to answer a question I had carried in my chest for almost 2 years. Was it all in my head, or was I finally seeing the truth clearly? I stood in the second row, behind her mother, of course. She insisted on walking her daughter down the aisle. No father in sight, just her, floating in designer clothes from head to toe, claiming the stage. And when my son turned to see his bride coming, I saw it in his face, that familiar blend of awe and nervousness. But he did not look back at me, not once. During the vows, her mother squeezed my arm and whispered, "You should be grateful. This is the best your son will ever achieve." I didn't react. I didn't flinch. I just stared straight ahead, trying to imagine my deceased husband sitting next to me, squeezing my hand in the quiet way he always did when something felt wrong, but words couldn't fix it. At the reception, I was seated at table 6. The rest of the family was at table 1. I smiled it away. I clapped for the speeches. I held back tears when my son thanked everyone who had raised him, naming his high school teacher and his soccer coach. But not me, not once. I said no word. That was the start of my silence, but not its end. Marriage did not change her. It magnified her. Within weeks, she started referring to me as his mother instead of by my name. In public, she would say things like, "Oh, Eleanor, yes, she means well," to strangers. In front of me, I became something that had to be explained, an obstacle to be managed. I remember the first family dinner after they returned from their honeymoon. She served me a plate of food and said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "Be careful, it's spicy. I know you older folks can't handle the heat." Everyone laughed, even my son. I laughed too. That quiet, brittle kind of laughter people use to survive humiliation. She constantly corrected me. If I told a story, she'd jump in with her version. If I offered advice, she'd reply with a smirk, saying, "Well, actually," everything I said was either outdated or cute. I was slowly being framed as the relic in the room, present but irrelevant. And my son, he no longer saw it. Or maybe he chose not to see it. I would call, and she always answered. She would say he was busy, tired, resting. Once I called to wish him a happy birthday, and she told me he was on a call, but she would pass along the message. I never heard back from him. One afternoon, I stopped by unannounced with a dish he used to love. She opened the door, looked at the container, and said, "Oh, how thoughtful, but we don't really eat fried food anymore. You know, gut health and all." Then she smiled and took it from my hands. I never saw it again. It wasn't just her, though. Her mother became a fixture. She came for dinner. She came for brunch. She just came. Every time I visited, she was already sitting in my seat, telling my stories, giving my son advice, slowly becoming what I used to be. Once, during a small birthday celebration, her mother pulled out a photo album. She showed baby pictures of her daughter, awards, certificates, home videos. She looked at me and said, "You must wish you had documented more. These memories are priceless." I excused myself to use the restroom. I didn't cry. I just stared at my reflection and asked the question I was asking myself more and more often. What am I doing here? But then the strange things started. Small at first, a forgotten moment here, a wave of dizziness there. I chalked it up to exhaustion, maybe dehydration. But then it got worse. I would walk into a room and forget why I had entered. My hands would tremble while doing the dishes. My vision blurred once while reading a recipe. My body, which had always been strong, steady, reliable, began to feel alien. I went to the doctor. Blood pressure, cholesterol, vitamin levels, all normal. They suggested stress, perhaps early menopause, maybe grief, maybe just age. But I knew my body. I had lived in it long enough to know when something was different. And what made it harder was her reaction, not with concern, but with suggestions, supplements, teas, oils, a detox smoothie she insisted I try. One day, she handed me a small pill container labeled Daily Balance and said, "This helps with memory and mood. I use it. You should too." And that voice inside me that I had ignored for years started speaking louder, warning me that something was wrong. One evening, she made me a special mixture, said it would calm the nerves. I took a sip and instantly felt groggy. Not dizzy, just hollow, like someone had dimmed the lights in my head. I excused myself, went home, and threw up everything I had eaten that day. My stomach churned for hours. The next morning, I wrote everything down. Time, date, what I ate, what I drank, who prepared it, how I felt. I started tracking everything like evidence, like I was building a case I couldn't explain. I didn't tell anyone. Who would have believed me? Who would have believed that the same charming daughter-in-law who hosted perfect dinners, who volunteered at charities, who always kissed my cheek when she arrived, could also be slowly erasing me from the inside out? Yet the most painful part was my son. The distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional. He no longer asked about my health. He no longer noticed when I stopped calling. At one point, he even said, "You know, maybe you should see someone. You've been acting different lately." Different. That word haunted me because he was right. I was different. Not because I had changed, but because they were changing the world around me. I started questioning everything. My memories, my words, my reactions. Was I too sensitive? Was I imagining all of this? Or worse? Was I becoming the woman they whispered about behind closed doors? The forgetful mother, the moody guest, the fading matriarch? Still, I said nothing. I smiled when I should. I nodded when they offered advice. I played the part. I played it well, but every lie has a limit. Every performance has an end. And though I couldn't prove it yet, I knew without a shadow of a doubt that I was being pushed out, not with force, but with strategy, with intent, with a plan so perfect it almost worked. It wasn't a single moment. It was many small details, disconnected at first. A misplaced bottle, a forgotten name, a wave of fatigue that hit me too fast after a meal, a drink in my hand that she had poured. There were no obvious patterns, not at first, but there was something strange about how the offers came. Always her voice, gentle and generous. You must be thirsty. Try this. I made it myself. A little red wine helps circulation. Eleanor, let me fix you something. You've had a long day. And every time I accepted it, I didn't feel it immediately, not in a way I could name, but a slowness crept in behind my eyes, behind my limbs, as if someone were holding my body back from the inside. Sometimes I would lose hours, drift off mid-conversation, or wake up later than I ever had. I told myself I was tired, that age was catching up, that maybe, just maybe, they were right, but something was wrong. And the more I thought about it, the more I saw it. I had never seen her pour anyone else a drink with the same ritual. Not even her husband. Not even her own mother. Only me. And the supplements. I had been taking the same 3 pills for years. My doctor knew it, my pharmacist knew it. I kept them in a small travel case in my purse, always labeled and sealed. One morning, I opened the container and found the pills slightly changed. Same color, same shape, but a faint bitter smell I didn't recognize. I didn't take them that day. The next week, I found 2 of the pills crushed, almost powdered, at the bottom of the bottle. I didn't confront her, I didn't ask questions. I simply started watching. At family dinners, I pretended to eat, but chewed slowly enough to feel if anything tasted strange. I drank less. I left the wine untouched. I started sitting closer to the kitchen door, closer to the window, closer to the exits, and I started writing. Not journaling, but documenting. A spiral notebook I kept hidden in my drawer at home. Date, time, what I ate, what I drank, where I was, who served me, how I felt 30 minutes later, an hour later. That notebook became my second memory. I didn't trust my body anymore, but I trusted my records. I wrote everything down, even if it seemed ridiculous. I tracked when the brain fog hit, when the trembling started, when my skin flushed for no reason. I compared it to days when I ate alone, cooked for myself. On those days I was fine. I was clear-headed, steady, normal. I remember one Sunday after brunch, she offered me chamomile tea. I took the mug, didn't sip, just held it, watching the steam rise. I excused myself to use the restroom, poured the tea down the drain, then rinsed the cup and brought it back empty. She smiled and said, "Feeling better already, aren't you?" And in that moment, I knew it wasn't my imagination. It wasn't stress. It wasn't menopause. Something was being done to me. I started noticing other things too. My medication, which I kept in a drawer in my guest room, was sometimes in different positions, a foil pack ripped open. I started counting the pills after every visit. I marked the backs of the labels with tiny pen dots. One day the number didn't match. 2 tablets were missing. I hadn't taken them. I hadn't touched them, but someone had. Still, I said no word. I couldn't, because what would I say? That I believed my daughter-in-law was drugging me. That her mother might be complicit. That my son, my only son, was sleeping next to someone who might be slowly erasing me. I needed more. I needed something they couldn't talk their way out of. So I took photos. Not of them, but of everything else. The altered pills, the food I didn't eat, the drinks I poured down the drain, the bottles I suspected had been tampered with. I put them in sealed bags and labeled them. I didn't even know what I was building, but I was building something. Something I could hold up one day and say, "This is real." I even started asking questions, subtle ones, disguised as forgetfulness. I'd say, "Oh, I don't recall taking this vitamin. Did you give it to me, sweetie?" Her eyes would flicker for just a second. Then she'd laugh and say, Yes, don't worry, you always forget. Every time I pretended to forget, she grew bolder. Every time I smiled and acted confused, she added a little more. Every time I left something untouched and returned it empty, her confidence grew. And that told me something very important. She wasn't just trying to make me sick. She was trying to make me doubt myself, to make others doubt me. Slowly, methodically, she was constructing an image of me as frail, forgetful, fading. There was one night I will never forget. A family movie night. Her mother had just arrived, uninvited as usual. She sat next to me, glanced at my knitting bag, and said, "Still busy hands, I see." "That's good. Idle hands are the first sign the mind is slipping." The words were casual, the tone pleasant, but I understood them as they were meant. Another brick in the wall they were building around me, a wall that once completed would isolate me completely. I would be the confused mother, the unreliable narrator, the emotional one, the burden. But I was not broken. I was not confused, and I would not be erased. So I continued to play my part, let them believe I was slipping. Meanwhile, I sharpened my awareness like a knife in the dark. I started asking my pharmacist about lab testing for supplements. I secretly contacted an old friend of my husband's who worked in forensics. I asked questions. He didn't understand. I told him I was writing a book on elder abuse just to be safe. I was preparing for something. I didn't know what, but I knew that sooner or later they would cross a line, a visible one, a line I could trace back to them in broad daylight. And when that moment came, I would be ready, because no one, not her mother, not even my own son, would see it coming when I finally took back control. Not with screaming, not with accusations, but with the quietest weapon of all, the proof. The invitation came by text message, casual, cheerful, with too many exclamation points. "We're hosting dinner this Saturday. Just the immediate family. Can't wait to see you, Eleanor." I stared at it for a long time. I knew what it meant. These dinners were no longer truly about family. They were about staging, about control, about making sure I stayed in the place they had created for me. Quiet, agreeable, small. I didn't reply right away. I waited until the next morning and then typed a simple, "Looking forward to it." No emojis, no warmth. Just the kind of response they were now used to. Predictable, harmless. But I didn't come empty-handed. I brought more than my handbag that evening. I brought my notes, my suspicions, my silence, my quiet. The house was spotless. It was always too perfect. Every napkin folded identically, every fork lined up like soldiers. Her mother was already there, holding court at the kitchen island like on a throne, swirling a glass of red wine and making notes on the ambiance. I greeted both of them with the kind of smile I had perfected over the last year. Warm on the outside, hollow within. My son greeted me with a distracted side hug. She kissed my cheek. Her mother gave a compliment that sounded more like a warning. "You look well, Eleanor. Much better than last time. Must be all the rest you're getting." I simply nodded and set the dessert I had brought on the counter. Apple crisp, her least favorite. I knew she wouldn't touch it. Dinner began like all their gatherings. Forced laughter, stiff small talk. Her mother talked about real estate. She talked about renovations. My son sat quietly, occasionally glancing at his phone. I took small bites, making sure to only eat what I served myself. Then it happened. After the plates were cleared, she stood up and said, "I made something special just for you tonight, Eleanor." She said it as if it were a gift, as if I should feel honored. She turned to the bar cart and began preparing drinks with a practiced elegance. Ice clinking, citrus slices, careful stirring. My eyes followed her every move. When she returned, she handed me a tall glass, chilled, clear, with a pale pink tinge and something floating, perhaps rosemary or mint. She placed it directly in front of me and smiled. "This one is special for you. My own recipe. You will love it." I met her gaze and smiled. A different kind of smile, one I hadn't used in a very long time. Not warm, not grateful, simply silent. "Thank you, dear," I said, lifted the glass but did not drink. I set it back down. I glanced at my son. He was not looking up. I waited for a moment of distraction, a pause in their staged rhythm. And when it came, as her mother stood up to adjust the thermostat and she turned to follow, I acted calmly, quietly. I reached forward, took her mother's identical glass and swapped them. My glass for hers, seamlessly, effortlessly. No one noticed it. No one ever did. The glasses stood there as if nothing had changed. But everything had changed. I returned to my seat, folded my hands in my lap, and waited. No fear, just quiet clarity. I watched her mother sip, as she always did, gracefully, greedily. I watched my daughter-in-law look at me, then the glass. I smiled again. This time I saw the flicker of confusion behind her eyes. Small, subtle, but it was there. And in my head I spoke the words I couldn't say aloud. If I am wrong, nothing happens. If I am right, we will all see it. Minutes. I knew the pattern by now. I watched the clock without watching it. I engaged in light conversation. I asked her mother about her new marble work. I praised the lighting. I played my part. But beneath it all, I listened for the change. The first sign came as a pause in her mother's sentence. She was mid-sentence, describing her wine cellar renovation, when she suddenly blinked twice and touched her forehead. She tried to continue, but her voice became just slurred enough that my son looked up. Then she cleared her throat, laughed, wiped it away. "Must be the wine," she said, although she had only had half a glass. Her daughter leaned forward slightly. Her smile did not reach her eyes. Another 5 minutes passed. Her mother's face turned deep red. She reached for her water, her hand trembling. My son stood up. "Are you all right?" he asked. She nodded quickly. Too quickly. Then she said something about the room spinning. Her words did not fit together. They tumbled over each other like marbles down a flight of stairs. Then came the final moment I had waited for. Her mother's hand clutched the table tightly, her knuckles white. She looked at me, not her daughter, not her son-in-law, me. And I looked back. I did not move. I did not speak. I did not flinch. I simply held her gaze as the panic slowly blossomed in her eyes. She suddenly stood up, or tried to. The chair scraped back. She stumbled to the side and knocked over her glass. My son rushed to her. My daughter-in-law froze. There were voices, panicked ones. My son called her name. His wife dialed her phone. The smell of something bitter rose from the spilled drink, but I did not move. I sat there calmly, watching, as I had watched for months, as I had learned to wait. The paramedics arrived, the questions began, and all I said was, "I don't know what happened." She seemed fine a moment ago. No one asked about the drink, not yet, but I knew it would not be long. As they carried her mother out on a stretcher, I met my daughter-in-law's gaze. For the first time, she looked at me as if she did not know who I was, as if she had been looking at a ghost the entire time. And now, only now, she saw the woman behind the silence. I raised my glass, the one meant for me, still full, still untouched, and I whispered to myself, "What a shame. I guess I just wasn't thirsty tonight." The room was loud, but I only heard one thing. The sound of her breath changing. That slight, stuttering gasp that comes before the body knows something is wrong but hasn't figured out what yet. She clutched her stomach first, one hand, then both, as if something inside was clenching tight. Her shoulders hunched inwards. She blinked rapidly. Her wine glass slipped from her hand and hit the table, wobbling. She mumbled something no one could understand. Her daughter reacted first, half standing, half restrained. "Mom," she said, not loud, just sharp, controlled concern. Not panic yet. I remained seated, hands folded in my lap, observing, because I had seen this play before. Only I hadn't been the audience. Her mother coughed. Once, twice, loud, dry, hoarse, then clutched the edge of the table, slowly pulling herself up, only to sway and fall back into the chair. Her face began to lose color. Her lips became a shade too pale to be reassuring. My son rushed to her side, placing a hand on her back. "Are you okay?" he asked. She did not answer, and then she said it, just one word. Unclear. Thick, wet burning, that is when the panic started. My daughter-in-law was no longer composed. She stood up, circling the table, asking questions loudly. Too loudly. What did she eat? What did she drink? "Someone call 911!" Her voice broke on the last word. Her hands were shaking. Her mother tried to speak but only emitted a low groan. The room was no longer under control. My son fumbled for his phone. She already had hers out. I simply reached for a napkin, gently dabbed my lips, and stood up. They did not notice me at first. Not until I walked over and picked up the glass. The one she had given me. The one I had swapped. I held it gently, as if it were something sacred. My son looked at me. "Mom, what are you doing?" I met his gaze and said plainly, "This is the drink she gave me." His mouth opened slightly, confused. My daughter-in-law spun around quickly, her eyes fixed on the glass in my hand. That is when her panic sharpened, shifting, transforming from worry to something else, something primal. Desperation. "Wait, no, that's not," she began but stopped. I tilted the glass slightly, watching the light catch the surface of the liquid. "I haven't touched it," I said softly. Not a single sip. The paramedics arrived within minutes. Her mother was barely responsive now. They laid her flat, started an IV, asked questions. What had she eaten? What medications was she on? Did anyone see her ingest anything unusual? I answered precisely. Every item served, who prepared what. The timing, the swap. I never raised my voice, never looked emotional, just facts. She, on the other hand, could not sit still. She constantly shifted, interrupted, tried to control the narrative. "Maybe she has low blood sugar," she offered. "Or maybe the wine reacted with her medication. She's been tired lately. Honestly, it's probably just stress." The paramedic paused. "Did she drink anything before the symptoms started?" She hesitated, glanced at me, then at the glass. Her throat bobbed. "I made a cocktail, just herbs and a little gin. Nothing special." The paramedic took the glass from my hand. He sniffed it, looked closely, immediately bagged it. I saw the moment her composure broke, the way her shoulders stiffened, the way her lips pressed into a thin, pale line, her eyes darting, calculating. Within the hour, the police arrived. A young officer, calm, professional, asked for statements. I was ready. I handed him my spiral notebook, the one I had kept hidden for months. He raised an eyebrow when I explained what it was. He took it without question, reading a few pages on the spot. His expression didn't change, but his tone did. They took the drink, the glass, my vitamin bottle, the supplements. My daughter-in-law protested at first. "You don't think we— Oh, that's crazy." "It's just protocol, ma'am," the officer said. "We have to rule everything out." The room was cold. Her mother was already in the ambulance. My son stood in the hallway, silent, pale, looking between me and his wife, as if seeing two people he didn't recognize. And perhaps he did. Then she said it. Her voice rose, eyes wide with disbelief. She swapped the drinks. She must have. She must have. Why else would she mention it? There it was. The twist, the story she desperately wanted to tell. That I was the unstable one, the one making things up, the unreliable narrator. But it came too fast, too rehearsed, too loud. The officer didn't blink. He just wrote it down. "So you are saying she tampered with her mother's drink?" "Yes," she said, then stumbled. "No, I mean she must have done it. I gave her the other glass." I turned to them, my voice quiet. "You handed me the drink. You said it was special. I did not drink it. I swapped it with hers. She drank it." The silence that followed was dense. "Why would I do that?" she asked. I held her gaze. "You will find out." That night ended with her pacing the kitchen window. My son said little. The police took what they needed, and I walked home quietly, slowly, with the same hands that had rocked my little boy to sleep, now holding the proof he once promised to protect. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared, but because I was certain that something dark had been growing around me, and I had finally reached the roots. Let them dig, let the lab test come back, let the lies unravel. I was ready for the truth, even if it tore my family apart, because the worst had already happened, and I had survived it in silence. Now the silence was theirs to hold. The truth does not always break in a moment of chaos. Sometimes it comes slowly, quietly, like a letter sliding under the door. Another time, it stands in the corner of the room, waiting for someone to look into its eyes and say, "Yes, I see you now." 2 days after the incident, the detective called me back. His voice was calm, measured. "We'd like to speak with you again, Mrs. Smith, whenever you're available." I told him I would come in the next morning, but I did not sleep that night. Not because I feared what they had found, but because I already knew. I brought the journals with me, every page spiral-bound, dated, documented. I handed them over without hesitation. I let him look through my notes, my observations, my lists of symptoms, my calendar of reactions. I explained the food, the drinks, the pills, the swap, and then I sat in silence while they asked me questions I had prepared for months. Why didn't you say something sooner? Because no one would have believed me. How long did you suspect she was drugging you? Long enough to be sure. And the drink? Why did you swap it? Because I had to know if it was real, or if I was losing myself, as they wanted me to believe. They listened, took notes, asked permission to test the remaining pills in the bottle I had brought. I gladly gave it. The toxicology results came back in less than a week. The drink intended for me contained a benzodiazepine derivative, a tranquilizer often prescribed for anxiety or insomnia. In high doses, it can cause confusion, dizziness, memory loss, and worse when mixed with alcohol. They found traces of the same compound in the supplements I had kept, the vitamin bottle she had once smiled and handed to me. The officer did not say much when he called to inform me. You were right to be suspicious, Mrs. Smith. This is being taken seriously. What happened next did not happen in front of me. I was not there when they questioned her. I was not there when she broke down. When the glossy daughter-in-law who maintained the perfect image finally shattered under the weight of her own lies. But I read the report. She confessed not all at once, but in pieces. She said she only wanted me to rest more, that I was always tense, that she thought a little relaxation would do me good. When asked why she had never disclosed the pills, why she put them in my drink without consent, why she had offered to handle my prescription refills through the mail, her answers began to dissolve. She and her mother had been planning something for over a year. I did not know the full extent until the investigators explained it to me. They had started documenting my behavior, recording moments when I forgot words, when I repeated myself, when I seemed confused. These were the days I was drugged. They had carefully collected these instances and were preparing a case to file for guardianship, not for my benefit, but for control. Control over what? Over my husband's estate, the retirement funds, the properties, the classic cars he left in my name, the antique collection, the trust funds we had built together over decades. I hadn't touched much of it after his death, but they had. There were emails, texts, records of meetings with lawyers. Her mother had suggested that I might soon need assisted living, that I was showing signs of cognitive decline, that it might be time for a family member to manage my assets. It was not about helping me. It was about legally, permanently, quietly removing me. They did not want me gone, not exactly. They wanted me silenced, tucked away somewhere with soft walls and a nurse, somewhere they could visit once a month and bring flowers, pretending to be loving caretakers while draining everything my husband and I built with bare hands. My son, he claimed he knew nothing. And perhaps he did not. Perhaps he believed her when she said I was slipping. Perhaps it was easier to believe I was fading than to admit that the woman he married was orchestrating my disappearance in plain sight. When they confronted him with the evidence, the pills, the journals, the confession, he did not speak for almost 5 minutes. The detective told me he wept, not for her, but for what he had allowed. And her mother, she recovered after a short hospital stay, when they informed her what was found in the drink. She denied everything, claimed I had poisoned her, tried to spin the story, but the lab results did not lie. She had not been poisoned by a stranger. She had swallowed the very plan she helped design. Charges were filed. They are still in the system, under review, being contested. The legal mills grind slowly, but I do not need the outcome to confirm what I know in my bones. They tried to erase me gently, elegantly, with small doses, with carefully crafted conversations, with smiles that hid their hunger. But they forgot something about me. I survived war, childbirth, grief, building a home from nothing but bare hands and sheer will. I buried friends, raised a son, paid off a mortgage, and still stood tall when my husband died next to me in his sleep. You do not simply erase a woman like that. You do not underestimate her memory, her patience, her devotion to the truth. You do not write her off as frail and expect her to crumble. They had a plan, and I had time. They had secrets, and I had a notebook. They had control until the moment I decided to take it back. And when I did not raise my voice. I did not scream. I did not lash out. I simply picked up the glass that was meant to extinguish me and let someone else drink the lie they poured. That was my justice and the beginning of their undoing. I have to pause briefly. I was not prepared for that twist either. If your heart just skipped a beat, Tap the like button. That tells me I am not the only one who felt it. And don't keep this story to yourself. Share it with someone who loves real-life drama as much as you do. He came to my house 2 days after the report was released. No warning, no text. He just stood on my doorstep, keys in one hand and a folded paper in the other. He looked smaller than I remembered him, like a boy who had outgrown his armor. I opened the door but said no word. I did not need to. He stepped inside, sat where his father used to sit, rubbing his palms on his jeans as if trying to warm up something frozen inside him. Then he spoke. "She didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. You have to believe that." I didn't answer right away. I just looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time, I could not recognize the child I had raised in the man sitting before me. He went on, said it was a misunderstanding, that she thought I was struggling, that maybe she was overwhelmed, that she panicked, that it was never about the money, never about the estate, never about removing me, and I listened. I listened to every single word, because I needed to know if any of it sounded like truth, or if it was just echoes of the same lie she had been feeding him for years. When he finished, he looked at me, as if expecting forgiveness, or perhaps permission, or an easy out. And all I said was, "She drugged me, Matthew." His face sank, as if he thought I would not say it aloud, as if the reality of it had not reached the part of him that had to deal with it. "She didn't mean to," he repeated, and that is when I stood up, walked slowly to the fireplace, where his baby photo still sat on the mantelpiece. His little feet dangling over the edge of a tiny red wagon, his hand clutching my thumb as if it were the whole world. I picked up the frame and turned it face down. He watched me do it. His lips parted, but no words came out. I told him I was not angry. Not anymore, just tired. Tired of fighting to be believed. Tired of sitting at dinner tables where poison wore perfume. Tired of smiling at people who would rather see me buried than brave. I said, "Sometimes love makes us blind, and sometimes love forgets us." He did not reply. He just stared at the floor, as if he could find forgiveness in the grain of the wood. But it wasn't there. When he finally stood up to leave, he hesitated at the door. "Are you coming to the hearing?" he asked. I shook my head. "No, I've already lived through it." He left without a hug, without looking back. And I stood at the window, watching his car disappear down the road that once brought him home for Christmas. The road I used to shovel so he could ride his bicycle. The one he ran down barefoot when he was late for dinner. The one I never thought would carry him away from me like that. That night, I packed 2 bags. Just the essentials. A few clothes, my journals, the necklace my husband gave me for our 20th anniversary, and a house key I no longer had a reason to keep. By morning, I was gone. I told no one where I was going. I just drove past the town, past the courthouse, past the memory, past my son's face, past the door. I found a small town on the coast. Quiet, sunny, forgettable. I rented a modest cottage with chipped paint and ivy on the porch, the kind of place where neighbors wave and keep walking, where the past does not follow you inside. I planted herbs in the garden, basil, rosemary. Every time I watered them, I thought of the drink she had prepared for me. And every time I watched them grow, I remembered that I had survived. I found peace in the simplest things. Warm bread, the radio, the sound of rain on the metal roof. I found strength in the silence, real silence. Not the kind I used to bite down on, but the kind that held me like a mother. A silence that demanded no performance, no explanations, no apologies. I didn't block my son's number, but I didn't answer his texts either. He would text every few weeks, mostly short things. "Thinking of you. Hope you're well. I'm sorry." But not once did he say he believed me. Not once did he say he had left her. So I stayed away, because forgiveness is not always a door you open. Sometimes it is a door you gently close and walk away from with the keys in your pocket. And in that small house by the sea, with salt in the air and a new name on the mailbox, I built a life that no one could poison. Not her, not her mother, not even the son I once thought would protect me. Sometimes to save yourself, you don't have to fight. You just have to walk away before they convince you that you're not worth saving. And that is exactly what I did. They say revenge is loud, explosive, public, but that is only because they have never seen what silence can do, what patience can carve. What a quiet woman with time and truth beneath the surface can build stone by stone, until the day she no longer has to say a word to be heard. I did not speak to my son for almost a year after I left. He did not come looking for me, and I did not expect him to. But in that year, I made decisions, conscious decisions, with the same serenity with which I chopped onions in the morning or sorted laundry on Sunday. Quiet, steady movements that shaped the future, without ever raising my voice. The first thing I did was call my lawyer. His name is Arthur. He had been linked to my family since we bought our first house. He knew us when we had nothing, when we argued about who would do the dishes and how we would afford braces for Matthew. He was the one who read my husband's will when he died, and now I asked him to help me rewrite mine. We sat in his small office, surrounded by old law books and the smell of stale coffee. I told him everything. I showed him my journals, my statements, the final police reports. He didn't flinch, just nodded slowly, then picked up his pen. I cut them both out. My son, my daughter-in-law, every clause, every dime, erasing their names with ink so sharp it felt like a scalpel. It did not feel vengeful. It felt clean, necessary, like removing rot before it spreads. But I did not stop there. I instructed Arthur to divide part of the estate, specifically the part my husband and I once set aside for family legacy, and donate it. Not just anywhere, but to the causes my husband believed in. A veterans shelter where he volunteered, a scholarship for young mechanics, a program that restored old military jeeps and donated them to museums. My husband had hands that knew how to fix anything with wheels and an engine. He believed in hard work, in second chances, in quietly helping without expecting applause. So I sent the money there, to places that still carried his fingerprints and spirit. The rest of everything we built, I left to my granddaughter. She is only 6 now. She doesn't know much about lawyers or estate plans or betrayal, but she once climbed into my lap and whispered, "Grandma, your hugs make my heart stop hurting." That was all I needed to know. She was still untouched, still good, but I did not leave it to her blindly. I set up a trust to be paid out on her 25th birthday, if and only if her father and mother had no legal or financial control over her life. A clause that could not be contested. My lawyer made sure of that. Until then, Arthur would manage the funds, invest them, protect them, ensuring that what her parents tried to steal through manipulation and tranquilizers would never reach their hands. Not a single cent. And then I wrote the long letter. No computer, just ink and paper and time. It began with the truth, every line of it. I wrote about the drinks, the dinners, the silent months of confusion, the moment I realized I was being erased with kindness. I wrote about the swap, the 35-minute wait, how her mother collapsed over the table while I sat with folded hands, finally watching the lie crumble under its own weight. I did not dramatize it. I did not make it bitter. I simply told it as it happened, with a clarity only a survivor earns. I wrote that I forgave them, not for their sake, but for mine, because holding on to what they did would have rooted me in a place I fought so hard to leave. I forgave them and then I let them go. I wrote to my granddaughter too. I told her that being a woman in this world sometimes means learning when to speak, when to be silent, and when to walk away without explaining a thing. I told her that family is supposed to protect you, but when it doesn't, you have every right to protect yourself. I sealed the letter in an envelope, gave it to Arthur with strict instructions that it be opened on the day I die. Not before, not after. That was my justice. No headlines, no jail sentences, just paper and truth and time. No one would know until it was too late to undo it. And when the day comes, years from now, and they open that envelope expecting something gentle, something sentimental, they will instead find the whole story they buried, staring back at them in my handwriting. That is the special thing about silent revenge. It does not scream. It waits. It outlives the lies. It outlives the spinning. It sits quietly in a drawer, knowing that one day the truth will arrive in my voice, and there will be nothing they can do to stop it. And in that moment, whether I am still breathing or just a photo on a mantelpiece, they will know that I never had to scream to win. Time passes whether you watch it or not, whether you are ready or not, whether you are broken, healing, or perfectly still. 3 years passed quietly, only the seasons changing outside my cottage window. Birds came and went, waves crashed like clockwork, and slowly, gently, the ache I carried began to dissolve. Not because it stopped hurting, but because I finally stopped needing it to make sense. I found rhythm in the ordinary. I started volunteering at a small community center not far from my new home. Nothing fancy, just a 2-room building tucked between a pharmacy and a diner. But it had warmth, real warmth. We hosted free art classes for kids on weekends, soup nights on Thursdays, book swaps, food drives. I would sit and listen to people's stories, help fill out applications for food stamps or housing assistance, teach older folks how to use email, and no one there knew me as their mother-in-law or his mother or the woman who almost lost everything over a cocktail. I was just Mrs. Ann. They did not know my past, and I did not offer it freely. I wasn't hiding. I had simply outgrown the need to be seen through the lens of pain. I had other things to do. But life has a way of coming full circle. The truth has its own timeline, and one day it knocked. It started as a whisper. A neighbor mentioned that a woman matching my daughter-in-law's mother's description had been admitted to a private care facility a couple of towns over. Kidney failure, chronic confusion. Some said early dementia. Others said stress-induced collapse. No visitors, just silence. I did not gloat. I did not dance with satisfaction. I simply poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window for a long time, because I remembered something my husband once told me. Back when life smelled like paint thinner and fresh wood, the ground always evens out. Sooner or later, everything balances. A few weeks later came the second wave. My son, he showed up at the community center just after closing. I barely recognized him. He had more gray in his beard, less weight in his voice. His hands trembled slightly when he put them in his pockets. "Mom," he said. Just that, as if it were the first word in a language he hadn't spoken in years. I didn't rush to hug him. I didn't break into tears. I just nodded once, quietly, and gestured to a bench outside. We sat there in silence for a while, long enough for the sun to drop behind the roof and the crickets to start singing. Then he said, "She's gone. She left. Took the car, the savings, everything. It was all a lie, Mom. Not just what she did to you. Everything. I found wire transfers, fake business papers, credit cards in my name. I don't even know who she is anymore." I waited. I let him speak because I would not carry his guilt for him. "Not this time. I am so sorry," he said, and this time his voice broke. Not the superficial kind, but the kind that comes from the bones, from the shame finally finding its way out. I looked at him long and hard, wanting to say so many things. I wanted to ask where he was when I needed someone to believe me. I wanted to ask if he had ever read the police report, or if he just skimmed it between bites of dinner. I wanted to ask if he knew how many nights I sat at the window, wondering where my son had gone. But instead I asked, "Why now?" He looked down at his hands. Then he said something I will never forget, because the silence was finally louder than the lie. He asked about the will, said he wanted to make things right, said he did not care about the money. He just wanted us to be okay. And I told him the truth, not out of malice, but because he deserved to live in the reality he helped create. "The will was changed, Matthew, years ago. You are not in it, neither is she." He blinked once, twice, but he did not argue. He just nodded slowly, like a man walking through a fog finally seeing the outline of a cliff he once refused to believe existed. I told him about the charities, about the scholarship, about the community center, and then I told him about his daughter, that her inheritance was safely locked away, that it would never be under their control, that I had left her a letter she would read one day. When she was old enough to understand the weight of survival, he asked if he could read it. I said, no, because that letter was not for him. He had already read another version of the story, one where loyalty was blind and truth was inconvenient. He was not allowed to rewrite it now. He just had to live with it. He stood up to leave, then hesitated. "Do you think she will ever forgive me?" I did not answer that question, because it was not my job to answer it. Forgiveness is never something you can plan or demand. It comes when it wants to, or not at all. As he walked away, I looked up at the sky. Tattered pink clouds stretching across the horizon, a breeze that felt like a hymn through the trees. And I felt it, that quiet, that peace that only comes after the fire, after the loss, after being burned down to nothing and building something quiet, strong, and entirely your own back up. 3 years ago, I was almost erased by the people I loved most. But today, I run a center where strangers feel safe enough to cry in front of me, where children laugh with paint on their fingers, where no one has to earn the right to be believed. I lost a son, but I found myself. I buried the past, and in its place I planted something that will not rot, and that is enough. I did not raise my voice. I did not scream in courtrooms or beg to be heard at dinner tables that had long forgotten what it meant to be sacred. I did not break windows or throw plates. I did not storm out of rooms or come back just to be right. I simply stepped back. I let the silence speak. I let the truth settle like dust on every surface they tried to polish with lies. I watched time stretch out its arms and do what it always does: reveal. Because the thing about time is that it does not hide things forever. It does not protect deception, no matter how cleverly dressed, and it does not reward manipulation. Time may be slow, but it is faithful. And when you trust it, when you stop chasing justice and start embodying it, something changes. You rise and they shrink. I rebuilt quietly, thoughtfully. I cut ties not out of malice, but out of self-respect. I changed my will, not out of vengeance, but out of clarity. I poured what was once pain into places where it could bloom. I left seeds, not for them to remember me, but for them to never forget themselves. In the end, they lost more than money. They lost access. They lost the legacy. They lost the right to stand in the shade of the tree they tried to cut down. And I won everything I almost lost. Myself, my voice, my peace. I did not scream. I did not fight dirty. I did not play their game. I simply stood still, and the truth did the rest. And that is how I took back my power, without ever raising my voice. If this ending gave you goosebumps or left you speechless, please subscribe and hit the notification bell, because my next story might be even wilder. And please leave a comment below. I read every single one,